Now, in the midst of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, NATO Chief Mark Rutte has raised an alarm over the low defense spending of European nations.
Now, at an address on Thursday, the military bloc's general secretary warned that NATO countries were not ready for the threats they face from Russia. Rutte said that future spending of the alliance would have to be much higher than the current target of 2%. The NATO general secretary highlighted that the West was falling far behind Russia and China with respect to military capabilities.
I'll be honest. The security situation does not look good. It's undoubtedly the worst in my lifetime, and I suspect in yours too. We can prevent the next big war on NATO territory and preserve our way of life. This requires us all to be faster and fiercer. It is time to shift to a wartime mindset and turbocharge our defense production and defense spending.
Rutte's message of awakening comes just weeks before Donald Trump takes oath as the next U.S. president in January. Trump has repeatedly warned that the United States will withdraw from NATO if the military allies do not increase their share of defense spending.
The top officials say that the alliance is mulling over a decision to table a new goal at a June 2025 summit in The Hague. It remains to see how and by what percentage the bloc increases its spending percentage, given that several European nations, Spain and Italy, still fall below 2%. Many are worried about boosting defense expenditure, and they say that it will pose a challenge to several smaller European economies.
All right, for more on this, we're now being joined by Dov Zakheim from Washington, D.C. He's a former Undersecretary of Defense in George W. Bush administration and currently Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Zakheim, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Right, sir. Now, to begin with, we're seeing that Mark Rutte has raised alarm. He is saying that many European nations do need to increase their defense spending. We know that Trump's stance on this is very clear as well. He has said that the United States will pull out of the NATO alliance. Do you think this is a way of Mark Rutte to urge the NATO bloc to prepare for a Trump administration?
Well, it might be, but the truth of the matter is Rutte is just right. In his speech, he pointed out that the Russian buildup, military buildup and industrial military buildup goes well beyond whatever it needs for Ukraine, even if it fights Ukraine somewhat longer. This is a long-term challenge. And by the way, 23 out of the NATO members have reached 2% or are reaching 2%. That leaves a whole bunch of others that aren't even there, as you've already mentioned, for example, Italy, Spain. Then there's the problem that small countries are terrified of what Putin might do. And the smaller countries are spending money. Lithuania, for example, is already spending 3.5% of its gross domestic product on defense and wants to go up to 5%. Now, gross domestic product simply per person means that they are spending more relative to their small population than Germany is relative to its large population. So it's not just Mr. Trump's threats or implications that are getting NATO to wake up. NATO is waking up because Rutte says, rightly, Putin wants to swallow up Ukraine and he's not going to stop there. After all said and done, Russia already is inside Romania, inside Moldova with Transnistria. It's inside Georgia with North Ossetia and Abkhazia. So this is not something that just started this year or last year. This has been going on since Russia first invaded Georgia in 2008 and then seized Crimea in 2014. NATO is waking up, and it's the 11th hour.
Right, and it's great that you mentioned Georgia because we know that the events that are happening politically, in not just in Georgia, but a lot of other several European countries, they're moving away from EU and probably towards within-leaning governments, probably. Then how do you see this pan out with Rutte warning?
Well, in the first place, we know that Russia interferes in elections. Look how the Romanian Supreme Court just invalidated the election that took a minor candidate and put him in the lead, a guy who's pro-Putin. So, you know, we're talking about influence and all kinds of gray kind of actions, as they're called, that are seeking to undermine the West. And I would point out to you that as early as the beginning of the Cold War, George Kennan, the great American diplomat, wrote back to the United States government that what Stalin was trying to do was to divide Americans against each other. And quite frankly, what Russia's trying to do today is to do the same thing, not just vis-a-vis the United States, but throughout NATO. There is no question in my mind that Putin, as Rutte says, is not going to stop at Ukraine. There is Moldova, that's probably next, and after that, a NATO country. So either the West wakes up, if it's Trump that's getting them to wake up, or Rutte that's getting them to wake up, or Lithuania that's getting them to wake up. The West has to wake up because, quite frankly, as much as they might spend on defense now, if they go to war, it'll cost them a lot more.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, how it pans out, we'll have to see. But thank you so much for joining us, and giving your perspective.
Thank you for having me.